Somehow I blinked, and it has been 5 years since I quit my job in marketing at a tech startup to pursue content creation full time. What? Like, that is not computing in my head. It feels so surreal to say out loud that for the last 5 years, I have gotten to pursue my dream job of being a full time content creator. There have been a lot of highs, definitely a lot of lows, and so many in between moments that usually don't make their way to social media because they're so middle of the road and don't really hit the peak or the valley of the roller coaster of emotions. In today's episode, I am going to talk about the standout career milestones, some of the hardest moments that you probably did not see online, how my business has changed over the years, and the difference makers that have allowed me to sustain a career self employed as a content creator for 5 years. I'll also share what I would prioritize if I were starting from scratch today, because I think things look pretty different now than they did just 5 years ago. I really want this episode to focus on the reality of building something for the long term and what it actually takes to make this work as a career without millions of followers. Before we dive into the main topic for today's episode, let's do a little create and consume. As far as what I've been creating this past week, there's actually a lot going on that I'm excited about, but none of it is live yet. It's very much still in the creation and editing phases, but one thing that is live that I can tell you about is a blog post I wrote last week for my Palm Beach guide. And I didn't really talk too much on the podcast about the spring training trip that I did with my dad, but my dad and I are both Mets fans. And last month we went to West Palm Beach, Florida to see the Mets play the Astros and also the Cardinals for spring training. So that was a really fun trip. It also involved a day trip to Port St. Lucie, which is where the Mets do their spring training practice in Florida. And I did a whole vlog of that trip, which you can watch on YouTube. So I didn't want there to be too much overlap with the blog post. So the vlog was very much more about like the day to day and our experiences in the baseball. And I decided to focus the blog post more as a more traditional like travel guide for Palm Beach and West Palm Beach. So in the post, I break down both neighborhoods, where we stayed, what we did, all of that stuff. And I talk about restaurants, I talk about things to do. So if you are planning any trips to the Palm Beach area coming up, I highly suggest checking it out. We did have some really, really fantastic meals there. And if we had had more time, there's a lot of history to Palm Beach that I think is super interesting as well. So I will leave the blog post linked in the show notes. That, of course, has all the details in it. Okay, and then as far as what I'm consuming this week, I'm going to take this literally because a couple of days ago, I finally tried for the first time, like by myself at home, to make homemade pasta. Andrew and I took a cooking class in Italy last summer and obviously made pasta there, but like with the help of an instructor. And I'm sure that if any of our product was actually horrible in the back, the chefs probably just like tossed it and replaced it with their own. So who's to say? But I really enjoyed this process. I follow a content creator on Instagram and TikTok. Her name's Alessandra. This girl, also, everyone should go follow her just because her content is incredible. She also just had a baby, so congratulations, Alessandra. She does all of these fun themed parties, and she usually makes like a homemade pasta to go with them. So I honestly just followed her recipe, which I think my eggs that I used with 00 flour just were not large enough because the dough ended up being a little bit dry. So I had to kind of like sprinkle some water on it to help firm it up. I think I still have a little bit of work to do in terms of the ratio and everything, but one really random thing that happened last year in our old apartment building in Hoboken, the one that we were renting in, we used to have a building Facebook group, and someone posted in the Facebook group one day, like, spring clear out or whatever. I don't know what season it was. Clearing out my apartment, left a bunch of stuff in the lobby if anyone wants it. And I saw that there was a pasta machine. I was like, what the heck? So I ran down and grabbed it. Free pasta machine, like literally barely used. And I looked it up and it was over $100. And I was like, they just gave away this free pasta machine. This is amazing. Like, I can't wait to use this and make homemade pasta all the time. Obviously, it has not been all the time. And we went to Italy, 9 months ago? So I've been threatening to make homemade pasta for a while. And I finally did it successfully for the first time the other night. Again, I do still think I have some tweaking to do with the dough itself. I also ended up making way too much dough and I wasn't really sure how to store it for leftovers and stuff like that. So I think next time what I'm going to do is half the recipe and just cook the pasta that in theory Andrew and I would eat like that night. But as far as the pasta machine itself, I'll try to see if I can find a link to the one I have because it's so good and it made the process so easy. I flattened the dough on one side and then I used the attachment to cut all of the strands. I'm not even really sure exactly what type of pasta it ended up being. It was kind of like a fettuccine. It was a little too flat and long to be spaghetti, but whatever it was really delicious. I will insert a picture if you're watching on YouTube to show you the finished results. So I'm going to keep tweaking this and playing around with it because it was definitely fun. I would love to, like, just for the future, be the type of person where it's like on Sundays for dinner, we're making homemade pasta. Like, that is very aspirational to me. So we'll see if I can continue the process. And of course, don't forget to go check out Alessandra as well. I'll have everything linked in the show notes. I love when I take the consuming section of Create and Consume literally, and I want to hear from you guys as well. What have you been creating and consuming this week? So be sure to leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube. You can also leave a comment if you're listening on Spotify. Go follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Create and Consume Pod. I know it auto says it at the end of every episode, but like, hi, while I'm here right now, I think I should remember to say that. I post little clips on there from the episodes. You can follow along. You could share your thoughts. So definitely come say hi. With that being said, let's get into the topic of today's episode, which is really a celebration of 5 years being self-employed. I had no idea what this journey was going to look like when I first handed in my 2 weeks notice. And I'm going to tell you obviously all about it today. So just as a very quick background for anyone who just stumbled onto this episode, we haven't met before. First of all, hi, I'm Austen. Thank you for being here. In 2012, I started a blog called Keep Calm and Chiffon, which, as you just heard, I still write for today. I still have this blog after all this time. And 2012 is also the year that I started college. So I had my blog, and in college, I went to Barnard in New York City. I interned at as many different magazines as I possibly could with the goal of getting a job as an editor or an editorial assistant when I graduated. And I was actually able to do that. So in 2016, I started at Nylon Magazine as the editorial assistant. I later got promoted to assistant editor, and I worked there for a year and a half and was so content. Like, that was truly my dream job. I was having so much fun. I had a lot of responsibility. It was a really small and scrappy team. And Nylon is like one of those magazines I grew up reading and idolizing. So to work there in any capacity was the coolest thing in the world. And then Nylon sadly folded a few days after, I think, my 23rd birthday. So I was able to get another job pretty quickly after, which I was grateful for, at Interview Magazine. Funny enough, in the same building in Soho. Imagine the PTSD of getting laid off from your dream job and then you start a new job and it's just like in the same exact building that you had already been going to every day. Interview was another really cool experience. If you guys want to hear more about my magazine era, I definitely have a couple of episodes of the podcast that I've done about that already. So I'll leave some links in the show notes if you want to check them out. And then I worked at Interview for 8 months before they sadly folded too. So at that point, I had been in the industry long enough to have met a lot of other editors at different publications. So I decided to try my hand at freelancing. So I was primarily making money through freelance writing, but I also was really trying to take my blog and Instagram even more seriously at that point. So that's when I really started getting more brand deals. I started growing on Instagram more. I started a YouTube channel in 2017. So that was a really fun and experimental era, but there were a lot of things about freelancing where I didn't really like choose to freelance. I kind of just happened to start freelancing because of, no other options. So I always said that, if I were to do freelancing again, or if I were to like be self-employed, I would really want to make sure that I made that decision on my own terms and that I had much more of a plan in place. I freelanced for about a year and a half before I got an offer to work as the beauty content director at a tech startup. Some of you may remember that era too of my career. It's kind of giving all different eras, like magazine era, freelancing era, tech startup era. Taking the job at Jump Rope was probably one of the best things I've ever done in my career because I really knew the world of magazines inside and out, and this allowed me to learn a lot about marketing. I had a totally different set of responsibilities. I had a totally different job, and I really got to meet and connect with so many inspiring creators in the time that I worked there. And, then we all know what happened in 2020. That's around this time. And then by spring of 2021, I was feeling a little disenchanted with my job. It had changed a lot just due to the nature of like remote work and all of the different things that had transpired in the last year, where it wasn't really the job that I initially signed up for anymore. And while I was so grateful to still have work and so grateful that my company kept me on throughout a global pandemic, I had been feeling like this was no longer the right fit for me. And I went back and took a real hard look at all my numbers. I realized that in 2019 and 2020, I had been able to pull in 5 figures from content creation and social media just while it was my side hustle. So I realized that if I was able to do that, where I was only spending, 10 to 20 hours a week on it, like think of what I could do if it was my full focus. So in April of 2021, I quit my job, and that was 5 years ago. That's still not like adding up in my head. But I really wanted this episode to be really reflective and for me to be able to take a step back and tell you more about the big picture, like the top level things that I feel like truly made such a big difference, like the biggest ways that my business has changed in the last 5 years, some of the hardest things to get through. And so if you're looking for more like tactical tips and advice about being self-employed, being a content creator, I did want to reference 2 previous episodes of the podcast where I talk more about both of those things. Episode 12 is called Rules That I Follow as a Self-Employed Content Creator, and that has a lot to do with like setting boundaries, figuring out what your focuses are, what works for you and stuff. So I definitely do recommend also bookmarking that episode to listen to if you haven't yet. It's episode 12. If anyone here has been here since episode 12, leave a little comment with a heart emoji so I know to say thank you to you, because that was literally like almost 2 years ago. That's crazy. So thank you so much, whether you are a brand new listener or whether you've been listening since then. And also, I did an episode last year at my 4-year self-employment anniversary where I talked about how my business works as a self-employed creator. So that's a bit more of a detailed breakdown of systems that I use for how my business actually runs, and also specific income breakdowns and things like that. I will leave both of those episodes linked in the show notes if you'd also like to check those out. I'm really excited to look back on my business just with a lot more clarity now, and to have the data from the last 5 years essentially to go back and analyze and think more about what went wrong, what went right, what went maybe just averagely, and to really assess those things and kind of process in real time, because this is almost in some ways like as if I were doing a public facing performance review for myself too, because I don't really have an outlet to do that as someone who is self-employed. There's no like HR representative or someone above me tracking my progress and stuff. So you guys are definitely going to get a lot of details today. Let's start first with how my business has changed in the last 5 years. I mean, there's honestly a lot. And I think one thing that I love talking about is my income streams and how I am able to create basically a pie of income that is split in all different ways with all different income streams, because some income streams are much more seasonal than others, like brand deals or even digital courses, I would argue, during the start of the year and also maybe during back to school season are times where I am most heavily promoting my course offerings. And for brand deals, I feel like usually during spring and early summer and then holiday season is when most brand deals are coming through in my inbox. And those things alone are not enough to like sustain my full-time job as a content creator. And I also have passive income streams in my business too, like digital products, affiliates, ad revenue. There's so much that goes into everything. And I think the good news about the passive income streams is even if they're not your primary focus, or even if you're not making a ton of money from them right away, is they are so low maintenance that it's not like you need to shut them down for any reason if they are not bringing in a ton of money. They can kind of just operate in the background and turn into like a surprise payment here or there if that ends up being the case. Notably, one income stream that I both launched and shut down in the last 5 years was Patreon. And I just think that memberships are such a specific income stream. You really, really have to be committed to delivering high quality content every single week or month or whatever basis your membership functions on. And I actually love the idea of membership models. It just turned out to practically not make any sense for me based on the time and effort that I was putting into it and the amount of money that I was making from it. I have a YouTube video where I talk in depth about my decision to close my Patreon membership. I can link that down below. But I really think the biggest note for me was all about the fact that I didn't want to increase the monthly cost of my membership, which would have helped me make more money. And I was also having trouble scaling my membership to grow, which also would have meant that I made more money. And at the end of the day, I learned a lot from doing that. I'm not like mad that I did it or anything. And I feel like I was able to shut it down in a way that made sense. I also talked through that process in the video, without like burning any bridges or making anyone mad. But yeah, that's just one thing where I tried it and it wasn't really working for me. So I shut it down rather than continue to prolong it and deliver subpar content. I think one of the biggest shifts that I've made in the last 5 years was, when I first became a full time content creator, I had already established myself, I would say, as a creator economy expert, especially coming off of my role at Jump Rope, which was a tech startup where I was talking all about the latest editing tools, how to make great content. I was doing a lot of educational stuff and teaching. That kind of felt like what I was already known for in a sense. And so I decided to really like double down on that. So my whole YouTube channel became creator education. And for years, that's basically like what most of my content ended up circling back around to be at. And mind you, this is coming from someone who started with a fashion blog that then I also expanded to include beauty and travel. And I really loved all of that lifestyle content, but I had in my head, like, okay, if I'm doing this full time now and it's a real business, I have to approach it from the businessy mindset. Like everything has to feel really formal, everything has to look highly produced. I think I wanted to be taken seriously, you know what I mean? Because so many people, when I quit my job, were like, what the hell are you doing? You have like 14,000 Instagram followers. Like, why do you think you can be an influencer at all? So I did double down on my creator tips content. I obviously made my digital course, which is where I teach influencers how to start and scale passive income streams. And I still love that course. I'm still really proud of all the material in there. And if I hadn't been creating all that creator tips content, I never would have been invited to Made on YouTube, which I got to go to in 2024. That's YouTube's big event where they unveil all of their new features. Walking into that room, I always say, is like a parasocial mindfuck because you're walking around and you're just like, this is everyone who's usually on my YouTube home feed, but just like standing next to me. And attending that event, thinking about the scale, like the volume of amazing creators who were in that room and the reach of their audiences, I had truly like a light bulb moment. I also made a whole YouTube video talking specifically about that. If I am referencing a lot of other things today too, by the way, it's because I'm really trying to focus today's episode on these big picture shifts. And like, if there's something that piques your interest, I want to be able to direct you to another resource where I talk more in depth about that. So I have a whole YouTube video on my channel about why I decided to change my YouTube channel to abandon creator tips and go back to my roots in lifestyle, in fashion and beauty, and all of the things that I love, because I felt like I was limiting myself by just talking to an audience of content creators, especially when so many of like the tips that I was sharing, even about like entrepreneurship or just being digitally organized in your life or finding ways to make things more aesthetic, not just as a content creator, but maybe if you're hosting people in your home, or easy ways to put together outfits, like that all could apply to people who are not content creators. And I just felt suddenly very limited. I felt very boxed in. I felt like I was totally like tapped out of information to share. I was starting to make the same videos over and over again, and they did well and everything. Like I was making money on ad revenue from them. I was growing, getting more subscribers, but I just felt like a creator information robot. And I was like, is this really the business that I want to build? So I think that was my biggest like identity crisis pivot that I made. I stayed up so many late nights questioning that. I've definitely cried about that. The fallout from it also like did impact my business. I mean, I started totally hemorrhaging subscribers. Like people were unsubscribing left and right when I started posting vlogs. At first, I thought I was growing slowly, and then I realized it's not just that I'm growing slowly, but it's also that people are unsubscribing, because everyone who was there for the creator tips content, when I started posting more New York City vlogs, were a little bit like, where are the tips that I used to come here for? Which is understandable. My ad revenue plummeted. I stopped getting recommended by YouTube. And that was really scary because YouTube was one of the big money makers for me in the peak of like my creator tips videos. But I really felt like if I was returning to my roots of fashion, beauty, lifestyle, getting my like magazine editor hat back on, thinking of creative concepts and ways to vlog and document my life, but still make it helpful for other people, I feel like that was my intention all along. And I kind of went down this separate other rabbit hole where I was a creator educator, and I still kind of consider myself one. Like, I'm always around if people want to do consulting or hire me for workshops or take my course or whatever it is. But as far as my personal brand, especially in the age of AI, which that could obviously even be its own other whole episode, I wanted something that felt uniquely like me and something that could grow and scale into 100,000, subscribers, 1 million subscribers. Like, I do still believe that that is possible for me. And that shift and that pivot, I think, was one of the most impactful things that I did. And I'm still adjusting to it, honestly, like from a business standpoint, but I just feel so much more aligned and so much better about all the work that I am actually creating and producing. I also find that being full-time as a content creator, you are constantly trying to do what is creatively fulfilling, but also you have to prioritize what pays the bills, because that is just the reality. There isn't an additional other income source outside of content creation to rely on. And so for me, I have always found that I have really doubled down on the platforms that I do feel like have had a return on investment for me. One of which is YouTube, which maybe you're watching this episode on YouTube right now. Obviously, the podcast, also my blog, like those I have always been able to fall back on and rely on. And I love that it gives us real time spent together, like you listening right now and me. And these are also, frankly, the platforms that I feel like I have more control over. Like when I take the time to learn about them, set things up right, and actually execute and create great content, I do see a return on my investment of time. And that's not always the same that can be said for, well, Instagram and TikTok, especially with all of the TikTok uncertainty in the last few years. That's one thing that I really think my job in marketing taught me about too, is that you need both, right? Like you need this cozy, like super connected, long form content where we are building a deeper connection that goes beyond just a quick video. But we wouldn't have gotten here if it were not for some top of the funnel discovery content, right? Maybe you saw a clip of the podcast on social media and now you're here and listening. That's crazy. That's the goal. But like, it's still cool to think about how that actually happens. Or maybe you stumbled across an Instagram reel of an outfit of mine and somehow you stumbled your way over into the podcast. And however you got here, I'm so happy that you are here. Honestly, if you could even let me know like how you first found me or the podcast, I would love to hear from you, truly, because I feel like discovery can come from so many different places. Obviously, I have analytics to an extent, but I always just like to hear personal stories too, because for some of my favorite creators, sometimes it's like recommended by a friend. Or one of my favorite podcasts is Gilmore to Say. And I literally one day just on a whim was like, Gilmore Girls podcast in Spotify. And now I listen every week. I've been listening to that podcast for like 4 years. And that's just because I one day was like, is there a Gilmore Girls podcast? And it turns out there was. So I think those are some of the biggest top level ways that the business has truly changed over the years. Like the big pivot back into lifestyle content, the launching and also shutting down of various different income streams, and also where I choose to actually spend my time creating each week and what type of return on investment I see when I do that stuff. Because at the end of the day, like I need what I do to bring a return on investment, because it's also really still just me for the most part. I do have someone who helps with SEO for my blog. It's a company called Influencer SEO. So they help me optimize a couple of posts every single month. I do have a virtual assistant who helps me with podcast content, although transparently, that has also kind of been a bit of a struggle lately, too. I was working with someone great last year who had to leave because of different time constraints and other commitments, which was totally understandable. And in 2026 already, though, I've already gone through two virtual assistants that have not worked out, which is really like a huge bummer and so disheartening. So that's something I'm even, like, just to be very honest, still working through in real time. And then, I have Veronica who helps me with any legal stuff with her business curator counsel in terms of securing trademarks for the podcast and my blog. I have an accountant who helps with taxes. I hire photographers when I need them for things, but most of everything else is me. And that's why I try to be mindful with my time, because I am just one person and I can do a lot, but I can't always do everything. And I want to be mindful so I don't burn out or stretch myself too thin. All right, some of the hardest moments that you didn't see. I mean, this list could be a whole episode in and of itself, but I was trying to think of some of the most impactful things because there have been like silly things along the way. Like when I first started the podcast, I recorded a whole episode and somehow didn't record the audio. That was so embarrassing of like, how did I manage to do that? There was also one time with the podcast where I uploaded an episode and somehow uploaded like the raw episode without any cuts or edits. And someone messaged me and was like, normally your podcast is pretty polished. I was just wondering if maybe like this wasn't what you meant to upload or something. And I was like, oh my God, why is this so embarrassing? Why is this so hard for me to figure out? Like, that's been a big learning curve. And I don't know, there's obviously been like personal hardships over the years too. I've talked on here before about my father-in-law who passed in 2024 due to pancreatic cancer. I mean, the state of the world these days is not uplifting whatsoever. And when you're self-employed and it's up to you to like make sure you have yourself motivated and, trying to put on blinders and focus on your work, like sometimes it seems so inconsequential compared to all the problems in the world, which obviously I can't solve in one day, nor can anyone really. But I would say, like, to go back to the pivot for a second, I really do think that making that change is one of the hardest things that I had to do, because in some ways it felt like a lot of things. Like in some ways it did feel like, well, was I just wasting time like creating all of this content and helping other creators, not for anything, but like blow past me? Like I'm sharing all of my tips and strategies about pitching brands and how to grow and how to create great content. And it's like I'm giving away the playbook in a sense. And a lot of creators took that playbook and ran with it. And I know because I have had consulting clients who have hired me, and then they come back in 6 months and tell me about all of these amazing things that like I've never experienced as a content creator. But I'm not immune to a little voice in the back of my head that's going, well, you could have had that opportunity if you had done X, Y, or Z. And it's like kind of hard to think about. And when I look at my YouTube content from 2025, I wouldn't say that I took that year off really, but it kind of felt that way in my head, where I really just wanted to try vlogging for myself again. I wanted to like find my editing style, push myself to make better videos, like thoughtful vlogs. And I don't know how helpful they were for my audience. I am trying to change that this year on my YouTube channel, where I still do vlog my life, obviously, and incorporate different like elements and stuff into those. But I'm trying to go beyond the selfish content, like the eye-centric content. I think I talked about this in the first social media episode that I did from January, where we were talking about like what works on social media in 2026. Because last year I was creating very selfishly, and I fully acknowledge that. I think just after a couple of years of, like I said, building up other people, like helping other people be better at the thing that I have spent years doing than I ever was. And it's like, I really wanted to just go back to my roots, go back to myself. And even though I had so much fun creating all of those videos, like money wise, as I already told you, I did take a big hit on YouTube. And that is still something I'm like working to rebuild, and also to build with the lens of like finding my people for this, what I want the future of my personal brand and my content to look like. Because in some ways, I'm very grateful that I didn't have a bigger following and make this decision later on, when it would have been an even bigger like financial hit and it would have been even harder to pivot. with more visibility, more eyes on me, more people expecting something specific from me. So while it was the right choice at the end of the day, like creatively for something I wanted to do, I really am still refining what that looks like and trying to find my way back to the vision that I actually have, specifically for my YouTube channel, but obviously that impacts like a lot of the rest of my business. And like I said, even though I'm grateful that I didn't make that decision when I had, 500,000 subscribers who would have been probably kind of pissed and the content would have been very different. And I definitely don't think that in 2021 I would have thought that I would still be figuring things out, 5 years in. I think I would have hoped that I had it all figured out by now, but I just have come to realize that that is so not how it works. And to talk a little more about the comparison, because this is something I actually really, really struggle with. And I feel like I try not to give too much airtime to just because I don't want to like get myself all worked up about everything. But I mean, if you guys have been following me for a long time or even just listening to this episode, I'm telling you that I've been creating content since 2012. So maybe you're wondering, like, well, what the hell then? Like, if you've been doing this for so long and this is your job now, like, why don't you have 100,000 Instagram followers? Guys, I don't know why I don't. You know what I mean? I feel like I do a good job of staying consistent, trying new things, experimenting. The only thing I can really think of is that it's just not my time yet. And that when that happens and when the community grows and flourishes in the way that I envision it doing, it's going to all be for a very specific reason and it's going to all make sense at the time. Because the truth is, like, you don't need that many followers to do this for a living. I mean, I'm proof of that, like sitting here right now. I mean, I've been working as a content creator for over a decade now. I have met and established relationships with hundreds of brands, so many great contacts, people who pay me thousands of dollars to create content for them. That's something I'm super proud of. And again, it can be done without a massive following. But obviously, doubt creeps into my mind if I meet someone at an event and we exchange Instagrams, they have 1 million followers, and I say, "How long have you been creating content?" And they go, "3 months." And I'm like, okay. This is again why I try not to give too much airtime to it, because I could totally spiral out about this all day and like get stuck and not ever create anything because I'm so like embarrassed that I'm not further along somehow or confused as to why my content isn't doing as well. Like, don't worry, there's a million ways I could spiral about this, and I've been down at least probably 70 or 80 of those paths if I had to guess. And at the end of the day, whenever numbers start to stress me out, I always say to myself, and this ties back into the pivot, I don't just want an audience. I want an aligned audience. I want an audience that is empathetic and driven and passionate and connects with everything that I create content about. And if you have high standards for something, I think we could even like equate this to dating too. What is worth it doesn't just come easily. And I also wanted to talk about financial inconsistencies because that can be really hard to not necessarily have a true sense of what your income is going to look like each month. I find that my income is a lot more predictable now thanks to passive income streams because I know at the end of the day how much money I can expect each month from YouTube AdSense, my Mediavine blog ads, affiliate income, digital products, all of those types of things. But I was looking back at all of my different income and expenses sheets from over the years, and there were some months where it was like, oh, we barely scraped in $500. And then there are other months where it's like, great, you made $10,000. And it's like, wonderful. That's good to know. So, I mean, it really can vary. And I think that knowing that going into it, adjusting your mindset for that is so important too, especially if you were very used to, a regular W-2 income. I do think that as someone who is self-employed, I've had to create my own consistencies. And the good thing about that is, like Mediavine ads come in at the beginning of the month, YouTube AdSense comes in towards the end of the month. So in some ways, that is kind of like getting at least those bi-monthly payments. And then everything else on top of that, it's almost like being in a sales role where commission is a big part of your income. brand deals that I get, speaking opportunities, all of those other things that like I could pitch myself for and land, and like additional work that I could pull in, writing stories for publications. All of the rest of that is kind of up to me. So in some ways I do have that baseline, but as far as how much I want to work in any given month and how much work I'm able to get for myself, that can still sometimes vary a lot, which some people hate. I admit that I don't love it, but I have definitely built up more of a tolerance to it. And I obviously also have like savings, investments, all other things that help me feel secure in my future and not spiral if I do have a weird fluke month where like I'm barely making a couple $100s. And I do actually also have a YouTube video where I talk all about how I financially prepared to take content creation full time. So I can link that in the show notes if you want to hear more about that. Okay, I also wanted to write down the biggest difference makers of what I truly think has been able to help me make this work for the last 5 years. And I didn't want to like say generic things on this list, like doing brand deals or being consistent, because like I think we know all of that already. I was really trying to think more introspectively about like what keeps me going as a person, because I think that that is honestly half the battle, One really big thing that's made a difference and has allowed me to be a full-time content creator for the last 5 years was moving out of New York City. And that is something that would probably crush my 18-year-old self to hear that, but first of all, it's not that dramatic. I'm in Hoboken, so I'm not that far, but when we moved here in 2021, which actually the day that we moved to Hoboken and the day that I quit my job were like within the same week. So I really just said, okay, we're starting completely differently. We're doing a whole new bit over here in 2021. I would call this my lifestyle. Like I said, if this is something I truly want to do, I do need to change my lifestyle to make it work. And by that, I just meant I wanted to do this so badly that I was willing to make a big adjustment to my lifestyle, which granted, living in Hoboken, living in New York, there are tons of similarities. But for me, it was really going to be still a different thing to live in New Jersey again. However, in Hoboken, I got access to things that, again, made my life as a content creator so much easier. First of all, my cost of living went down. It's also much cheaper to run a business from New Jersey than it is in New York City. In New York, you're also paying state taxes and city taxes. It's just cheaper for me to be a business owner in New Jersey. I was able to actually have a dedicated work from home space for the first time ever. And now I'm sitting talking to you in my home office. Like this would not have been possible had I stayed in New York. Just like point blank, it would not have been for me personally. And I would also argue that my life in general has improved since moving to Hoboken. I still see my friends all the time in the city. I'm in and out just as much as I was when I lived in Queens or when I lived in Brooklyn. I get to see my parents more. I get to see Andrew's family more. Like the overall quality of life has improved in ways that I couldn't have even explained before moving here. So if you are going to be taking an income cut, as I kind of was, like when I quit my job in marketing, trying to make my own personal income catch up to what I was making previously in that job, just consider what you're willing to do to actually make that work. And what I maybe lost in income at the time, I obviously gained in freedom of designing my schedule, choosing which projects I wanted to work on, and being more in control. And that to me is something that I value so highly, to the point where I made a huge lifestyle change to accommodate it. Okay, I also think that one of the hardest things I have had to change is my mindset. Again, like when I was thinking about, okay, this is my 5-year milestone, what would me in 2021 think? And I think I would have wanted to know back then whether or not I felt like I'd made it. And I'm using air quotes again. I've been thinking just a lot about the concept of whether or not someone's made it lately. And I was actually listening to the Let's Get Dressed podcast with Liv Perez, and she had Joseph Altuzarra on, who is an iconic fashion designer. He has been in the industry for, I think he's had his brand for 20 years, and obviously he worked in fashion before that. So he's in his 40s now, and I'm going to link the episode that I was listening to down below in case you guys want to listen to it. He was talking about the idea of like whether or not he had made it or arrived or whatever you want to call it. And Liv said something to him about, well, it sounds kind of like the feeling of, oh, I've arrived is now less about scale and more about alignment. And I feel like that is something that I really resonate with so much because, again, like on paper, what does your success look like to other people? And scale is such a big part of it for influencers and content creators specifically, because follower count, views, impressions, virality, that is all still very highly valued in the industry. But as far as alignment, like, I feel I am so grateful. Like, I just, every day I wake up, I could cry. I might cry. And I'm just so excited that I get to create all day. Like, I, this is just something that I never could have even dreamed of. Like, my younger self would not believe that this is my job. And it is, I will never ever get over it. Like, the novelty of it will never wear off to me. Like, I will never stop being grateful just because, like, in what world do I just get up and create every day? Like, this podcast, like, I designed the cover art, like this episode, I wrote this outline, I'm talking to you about it now. Like, everything that just comes from my brain, I get to like fully explore and dive into every idea. Like, who gets to do that? That's insane. Sorry. Well, I guess if my 26-year-old self knew that I was crying on a podcast that was later created, that didn't even exist at the time, talking about how grateful I am to be doing what I'm doing, I would like to think that she would think that I have arrived, like that I'm here already. And it's such like a cliche saying, and Miley Cyrus wrote a fantastic song about it, that it really is about the journey, about the climb, and not so much about the destination. And I think that one thing that I would regret in my life would be if I was spending too much time focused on the destination, like the end goal. I think it's great to have goals, but I think you also really have to love and enjoy the process and really have to appreciate every day for what it is. Like, it sounds like the most basic advice in the world, but appreciate where you're at right now. Be grateful for everything you have. Like, that mindset alone makes me feel like I have the best job in the world and that I'm the happiest and luckiest person in the world. Like, and nothing else matters. Okay, and I'll try not to cry through this next one, but another thing that I believe is one of the reasons I have been able to do this for the last 5 years is also my support system. And I know I just told you kind of who helps me like on the business side of things, in terms of SEO and podcast stuff and all of that, but also my real life support system. I wouldn't be able to do this without any of them. So my husband, Andrew, my parents, my friend, Caitlin, all of the content creators who I am lucky enough to call peers in this job. There are too many people to even name, but I am just so grateful that I have an offline support system as well. People who not only believe in me and support me professionally, but who also give me outlets to express my emotions, to talk about how I'm feeling, to bounce ideas off of, to also unplug and disconnect from everything online and remind me that I'm a complete person without social media. I am just always grateful for time that I'm able to spend with the people that I love. And these are, again, like I said, people who support me in every sense of the word and who make me the person that I am. And another huge thing that has allowed me to be a full-time content creator for the last 5 years is my belief in myself. And as I've hinted at, there are obviously days where that's easier than others, but at the end of the day, I truly do see the vision for, how I picture my content creator business in the future. And I also have always just tried as much as possible to stand my ground. And again, sometimes this is not easy, especially when this is your job and this is your only job. But I have really tried to stand firm in saying no to offers from brands that are not aligned, turning down projects or assignments that are not paying me my fair rates. And even on days where it feels like I am trying to run up an escalator that's going down, and it feels so hard and everything feels like it's taking effort, or that things maybe are not going as smoothly as possible, I always just try to remind myself that no minute that I spend building what I'm building here is ever wasted. even if I film a podcast episode and the audio doesn't capture, even if I create a piece of content and I try to edit it and I realize that I shot something out of frame, nothing is a waste. Literally everything is a learning experience. And I saw someone post on Instagram the other day. I have no idea where this came from, so I apologize that I can't attribute this properly, but someone posted that the GPS never tells you that it made a mistake. It always just says rerouting or recalculating. And I think that's a great way to think of self-employment and also just building a creator business. Okay, so if you're watching on YouTube and you've noticed a jarring change in my outfit and also that I'm going to be finishing this episode from my desk, that's because I had a slight technical glitch while recording this episode. So here I am on a little editing day, so don't mind the cozy fit to finish out the last few minutes of this episode. The good news is I was almost done. I did have a small panic attack while I thought that I lost this whole episode because I've been really proud of it so far. But I have 2 more sections I wanted to get through, so that is what I'm hopping on to finish up now. Okay, in terms of what I would prioritize if I were starting out today, like on my first day of being self-employed, I think I would really just try to find a balance between 2 things. So I would recommend prioritizing one long form social media platform and one short form social media platform. Some that I think go well together are YouTube and Instagram, a podcast and TikTok, and a blog and Pinterest. And I just think that having one place where people can really come and connect with you on a deeper level, like a podcast, and one top of funnel option where people can kind of discover you. And then if they choose to spend more time with you, get into the weeds and like really get to know your brain through your long form content. I think that's a really helpful way to build a system of how people can really just figure out more about who you are, whether that's very top level in the discovery stage or whether they choose to spend more time with you and your long form content. So that is definitely one thing that I would recommend for sure. And then on a similar note, in terms of business model, I would definitely want to suggest that you have at least one active income stream paired with a passive income stream. And some things that I think go well together are brand deals and affiliate links, consulting and digital products for people who want solutions but maybe can't afford your one-on-one consulting rate, and also speaking and having a membership. But if it's a slow season in your active income streams, in speaking and brand deals and things like that, and as I've mentioned in this episode, I've been through those times too, you are never bringing in $0. And that's one thing that passive income streams have helped me so much with as a content creator. As I mentioned already, I teach a whole course on it. So if you guys want to learn more about the Influencer Income Accelerator, I will leave a link to that in the show notes. And last but not least, I kind of just wanted to shout out some career milestones and moments from the last 5 years that I am really proud of, because sometimes these things happen in the moment and I get excited about them, but I don't necessarily get as much of a chance to like truly celebrate them as I would like to, just because there's so many things on my goal list. Like the goal list is essentially infinite and could go on forever. But in terms of some true standout career moments and milestones from the last 5 years, 2021 was my first year in business full time. So, from April to the end of the year. So I guess it was really only 8 months. And in that time, I was hosting Clubhouse rooms, which I always say was like the gateway to starting this podcast. And I launched some new digital products in my business, which, like I just mentioned, is one of my passive income streams. In 2022, I celebrated the 10-year anniversary of my blog. It's getting to the point now where this year is going to be the 14th anniversary. So I'm getting to the point where I'm going to have had my blog for like half my life. It's just so crazy to me. I also hit 10,000 subscribers on YouTube in 2022. That felt like a huge, massive accomplishment and something that I still think back on and that I'm so proud of from that time. And that was also the year that I launched my Patreon membership, which taught me so much about passive income streams and what passive actually means. In 2023, I spoke at my first virtual creator conference. I will admit the day of logistics for that were not great. It was super disorganized. I also ended up starting my session to an empty room because someone on the back end like couldn't get me into my live session. So that wasn't great, but it did give me the opportunity to say that I've spoken at a virtual conference and hopefully will open the door for even more speaking opportunities in the future. And 2023 is also the year that I launched my digital course for the first time. In 2024, I had my first national TV appearance on the Tamron Hall show. I'll put a link to that in the show notes in case you missed that. I did my first overnight brand trip with YouTube in the city. I launched this podcast and I got trademarks for my blog and for my digital course. And then in 2025, I qualified for Mediavine with my blog. YouTube featured me on their blog, and I did my rebrand shoot where I also shot the cover image for this podcast and all new imagery for my blog and website. So I think it's safe to say it's been a crazy couple of years, and I am so looking forward to seeing what the next few years have in store as well. So if you've made it to this point in the episode, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for bearing with me through my tech glitches. And just know that, like, if this is something you truly are interested in doing, you can figure out a way to do it. And I always stand by that. I know it's not for everyone. Clearly, there's some ups and downs, as you've heard throughout this episode. But I am just feeling like the most grateful and creatively fulfilled that I basically have ever felt in my life. And for that, I'm extremely just endlessly grateful. I appreciate you all listening, and I'll talk to you all again next week.